It's strange how a few words from the right person can erase years of your life. I still remember the smell of that morning, the sharp sting of disinfectant mixed with the faint sweetness of floor polish. It was my scent, the one that followed me through every hallway and empty boardroom, long before the first suit walked in and long after the last one left. The building was my second home. I knew every light that flickered, every door that creaked, every spot on the marble floor that needed an extra wipe. I didn't have a corner office or a nameplate, but I had something better. Pride. I was the man who made everything shine before the world woke up. I arrived at work before dawn, like I always did. The city was still half asleep, its lights reflecting off the wet pavement as I carried my worn broom and bucket through the revolving doors. The security guard nodded at me, a silent acknowledgement between two invisible people. We both knew that without us the place would fall apart. People like us, we didn't get credit, but we kept the world running. The hallways were quiet, my footsteps echoing softly against the polished floor. I liked it that way. In those quiet hours, before the noise of meetings and phones and rushed conversations, I could almost pretend that this building belonged to me. Every time I passed the CEO's office, I'd glance through the glass wall, his big mahogany desk, his leather chair, the city skyline behind him like a kingdom. I didn't envy him. In fact, I admired him once. I thought he'd built something beautiful. My work was simple, but it meant something to me. I polished the floors until they reflected faces clearly, as if reminding everyone to look at themselves once in a while. I emptied trash cans filled with forgotten dreams and crumpled reports, and I wiped the fingerprints off glass doors, those invisible traces left by people too busy to notice someone like me existed. By 8 o'clock, the building was alive, heels clicking, ties straightened, laughter spilling down the halls. They brushed past me, eyes fixed on their phones, voices sharp with purpose. I didn't mind. I had my small world, a routine, a rhythm. I took pride in being reliable, in showing up every day without fail. In a world obsessed with titles, I was content being the man who kept everything clean. That day, though, something felt different. I'd barely finished the top floor when I heard hurried footsteps behind me. It was Mark, one of the HR managers. He was out of breath, holding a clipboard, eyes darting nervously. "Mr. Collins," he said, avoiding eye contact. "The CEO wants to see you now." I blinked. "Me?" He nodded quickly, already turning away. "Yeah, conference room B, bring your badge." I frowned. I had never been called into a meeting before. I wasn't sure what it could be about. Maybe an appreciation thing? Maybe they noticed how spotless the place was? That's what I told myself, though a small knot of worry formed in my chest. I wiped my hands on my uniform and walked toward the conference room, the smell of lemon cleaner trailing behind me like a shadow. When I entered, I knew it wasn't good news. The CEO stood by the window, his back to me, the city stretching out beneath him like he owned the sun itself. His suit was flawless, his posture perfect, and even his silence felt expensive. Next to him sat 2 HR reps, their faces tight and unreadable. "Mr. Collins," he said without turning. His voice was smooth, controlled. "Take a seat." I did. My palms were sweating. He turned slowly, his expression detached, as if I were just another file on his desk. "You've been with us for what, 10 years?" 12, sir," I replied softly. He nodded once. 12 years. He paused, looking at the papers in front of him. "That's a long time." I waited, unsure what to say. Then he sighed. "Unfortunately, the company is restructuring. We've decided to outsource maintenance. Your position is no longer required." The words didn't make sense at first. I blinked, trying to catch up. "Sir, I don't understand. Outsourcing? But I've been here since—" He raised a hand, cutting me off. "It's not personal. It's business. You'll receive a small severance package. HR will assist you with the paperwork." It wasn't personal. That's what he said. But it felt personal. It felt like every year, every night shift, every extra hour I stayed behind to make sure the place was spotless meant nothing. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. He was already looking past me, toward the skyline, as if I had ceased to exist. I trained the new staff, I managed to say, my voice cracking. I covered shifts when people didn't show. Sir, He turned back to me, and for a brief second, I saw something cold flicker behind his eyes. Mr. Collins, we all have to make sacrifices. This is mine. But it wasn't his sacrifice. It was mine. One of the HR reps slid a paper toward me. I stared at it, my name printed neatly at the top, followed by a paragraph that ended my entire career. My signature was supposed to go at the bottom. My hands shook as I held the pen. I didn't sign it right away. I looked up, hoping for a flicker of humanity, maybe even a simple, thank you. But he had already turned away, his reflection blending with the city lights outside the window. When I finally left the room, the hallway felt different. The same polished floor that once gave me pride now felt like glass under my feet. Cold, slippery, ready to shatter. I passed by familiar faces, but no one looked at me. No one even noticed. I walked to the supply closet one last time, opened the door, and stared at the shelves filled with the tools of my small purpose. Mops, brushes, and old bottles of cleaner. I placed my ID badge on the counter and whispered, "Thank you," though I didn't know to whom. Outside, the world was still moving, cars rushing, people laughing, life going on. But for me, everything had stopped. The wind hit my face, and I realized my hands were empty. 12 years reduced to a folded paper in my pocket. When I reached home, my daughter ran to me, waving her school drawing. "Daddy, look," she said proudly. It was a picture of me in my blue uniform, smiling, holding a broom like a hero's sword. I smiled back, but my throat burned. I couldn't tell her that her hero had just been erased by a man in a suit. That night, I sat by the window long after everyone else had gone to sleep. The letter from HR lay on the table beside me, unopened. Outside, the city lights glowed like stars I could never touch. I thought about how easily someone's worth could vanish in the shadow of power. I had been loyal, I had given everything, and in return, I had been dismissed like a stain on the floor I used to clean. But somewhere deep inside the ache, I made a promise to myself. I might have lost everything today, but I would not lose my dignity. Someday, somehow, he would remember me, not as the man he fired, but as the man who taught him what true worth meant. And what I didn't know then was that the man who fired me would one day kneel before me. People only notice a janitor when the floor is dirty. That line used to echo in my head every time I pushed my mop across the marble lobby floor. It wasn't bitterness that made me think that way. It was truth. People love clean spaces, but they never think about the hands that keep them clean. I'd see polished shoes walking past me, expensive watches glinting under fluorescent lights, and I'd wonder if any of those people ever realized that someone like me had been there long before them, making sure their world shined before they even stepped into it. For most people, a janitor is invisible. For me, it was a badge of quiet pride. My uniform wasn't tailored, and my name wasn't engraved on a door, but what I did mattered. I made things better, bit by bit, stain by stain, night by night. That was enough. My day started before the sunrise, always the same way. The alarm at 4:30 a.m., the sound of old pipes groaning as the water heater fought to wake up, the smell of cheap coffee filling our small kitchen. My wife, Maria, would still be half asleep, her hair messy but her smile waiting. "Be careful on the roads," she'd say, her voice soft and warm. Our house wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, cracked paint, and a porch that creaked under your feet. But it was ours. The walls were lined with my daughter Lily's drawings, me holding a broom, her standing beside me with a crown drawn on her head. "You're the king of clean, Daddy," she'd tell me once. I laughed, but she was serious. In her eyes, what I did was important. And when your child believes in you, you start believing it too. I'd drive to the city with the radio playing softly. The sun not yet risen. There was a calm in those early hours, a sense that I was part of something bigger, something steady. The moment I stepped into the building, it was mine for a little while. No phones ringing, no shouting, just me, my mop, and the hum of fluorescent lights. I had my routine down to muscle memory. Start from the lobby, move up through the conference rooms, finish near the executive floors before the suits arrived. I'd hum old tunes my father used to sing while working construction. He was the one who taught me that work, no matter how small, becomes sacred when done with honesty. Don't ever let anyone make you feel lesser because of what you do, he'd told me once, wiping sweat from his forehead. The ground they walk on is only clean because someone like you cared. That thought stayed with me every single day. Over time, the staff came to know me. Not well, but enough for polite nods and the occasional morning. There was Sarah from accounting. She'd always bring me a cup of coffee during tax season when she worked late. There was old Frank from security, who'd share his cigarettes during breaks. They were my quiet family in that big, loud building. I never felt alone. Sometimes I'd catch people whispering as I passed, not in cruelty, but in that careless tone people use when they think you don't hear. He's always here, someone would say. Does he ever take a day off? I didn't mind. I liked being the constant, the one who showed up when others didn't. There was one morning years ago when the CEO, the same man who'd later fire me, walked through the lobby early. I was buffing the marble, headphones in, lost in rhythm. I didn't even notice him until he stopped beside me. "You do good work," he said simply. I took off my headphones, a little startled, and smiled. "Thank you, sir." It was only 3 words, but they stayed with me for years. No one had ever said that before. For the first time, I felt seen. Not as the janitor, but as a man. From that day on, I worked even harder. I wanted to make sure no one ever regretted hiring me. But time changes people. The company grew, new faces came, and the CEO became more distant, colder. The smiles disappeared, replaced by nods that carried weight instead of warmth. I still cleaned his office every evening after he left, wiping his desk, emptying his trash, straightening the chair so it faced the window perfectly. Sometimes I'd pause and look out at the skyline the way he must have done, wondering what it felt like to sit in that chair and believe the world belonged to you. Still, I was happy in my own way. My wife and I celebrated small victories. A new jacket for Lily, an extra shift that paid for better groceries. Life wasn't easy, but it was ours. I never complained. One evening, near Christmas, I stayed late to help a team clean up after a corporate event. The lobby was covered in confetti, half-empty glasses, and laughter, still echoed faintly down the hallways. As we worked, one of the junior managers approached me, clearly drunk, holding a half-finished drink. "You know," he slurred, "you're the only one who never gets a bonus here. Isn't that funny?" I smiled politely and kept mopping. He laughed and stumbled away, but his words lingered. Not because I wanted a bonus, but because it reminded me that people saw me as part of the furniture, useful, but unnoticed. That night, I came home late. My wife was asleep, but Lily had left a drawing on the table. A stick figure version of me with the words, "My hero," written above it. I sat there for a long time, staring at that piece of paper. It reminded me that respect doesn't have to come from the top. It comes from the people who love you for who you are, not what title you wear. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing at work. The air had grown tense, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. There were whispers of budget cuts, outsourcing, and new management. I tried not to think about it, but each passing day felt heavier than the last. Then, one Monday morning, I noticed something different. The CEO arrived earlier than usual. He didn't smile, didn't greet anyone. His eyes were colder than I'd ever seen them. I was mopping the floor near the elevators when he passed. He didn't look down, didn't even acknowledge me. But something about his expression, sharp, distant, final, made my stomach twist. By noon, the HR office called me in. As I walked down that long hallway, mop still in hand, I caught my reflection in the glass. My uniform looked the same as it had for years. Blue, faded, neatly tucked. My shoes squeaked faintly against the spotless floor I'd cleaned myself. I took a deep breath before opening the door, trying to keep that small, steady smile I always wore, the one that told people I was fine no matter what. But that smile disappeared the moment he looked me in the eye and said, "You're done here. Some men wear suits not for power, but to hide how small they truly are. I used to believe that power was measured by the weight of your decisions, by how many people stood when you entered a room, by how silent it became when you spoke. For years, that belief had shaped me, built me, blinded me. My name was Robert Hale, CEO, visionary, leader, the man everyone wanted to impress and no one dared to question. I wore my suit like armor, tailored perfectly, every thread screaming control, and for a long time, I thought that was who I was. Control itself, walking on two legs. I was 38 when the world bowed to me. My company's logo lit up city skylines. My name filled headlines. Youngest CEO to take a startup global. The man who turned dust into gold. They called me relentless, brilliant, unstoppable. I called it Tuesday. Every morning I'd arrive at the office before anyone else, not because I needed to, but because I wanted them to see my car parked outside when they came in. It was a statement. The king is already here. My corner office, 37 floors above the street, overlooked the city like a throne overlooking its kingdom. From there, I could see everything, except myself. The people around me fed my illusion. The board called me a genius. Investors worshipped my confidence. Even the employees smiled too hard, laughed too loud at my jokes, nodding as if every word I said was scripture. I didn't notice their fear. I mistook it for respect. When you live that high above the ground, you forget what it's like to feel it under your feet. I remember the janitor, old man, quiet, invisible. He'd been there longer than I had. I used to see him late at night, pushing that mop down the hallways long after everyone had left. I never really looked at him. Not at him, just through him. In my world, people like him were background noise, necessary but irrelevant. Floors needed to shine, windows needed to sparkle, but the hands that made it happen? Replaceable. That's how I saw the world. Replaceable. If someone quit, I hired another. If someone broke, I found one who wouldn't. Efficiency over emotion. That was the code I lived by. And for years it worked. Until it didn't. The first crack appeared the year the economy dipped. Numbers began to shift. Investors grew anxious. I told them it was temporary. And they believed me because I spoke like God did, with certainty. But behind closed doors, I saw the numbers bleeding red across reports. My empire wasn't collapsing yet, but the foundation had begun to shake. The board demanded cuts. They used words like efficiency, streamlining, restructuring, all corporate poetry for removing people. To them, it was numbers on a spreadsheet. To me, it was an opportunity to remind everyone who was in control. That was the day I decided to let the janitor go. He wasn't the only one. There were dozens of others. But I remember his face the clearest. He stood in my office, hands folded, uniform neat despite the years. His eyes were calm, tired, and there was something in them that made me uncomfortable. Not fear, not anger, just quiet disappointment. "Mr. Hale," he said, his voice steady. "I've been here 23 years. I've never missed a shift, not once." I nodded, not really listening. "We're restructuring," I said in that rehearsed tone CEOs use when they want to sound empathetic without actually feeling it. "It's nothing personal." He looked at me for a long moment, and I could tell he wanted to say something. Maybe plead, maybe argue. But instead he just nodded. "I understand," he said quietly. And that was it. He left. I didn't think about him again. The rest of the staff noticed, of course. Whispers spread through the building. Some said he didn't deserve it. Others said I'd done what I had to do. I didn't care either way. Decisions like that were proof of strength, not cruelty. In my mind, compassion was weakness, and weakness had no place in business. But cracks have a way of spreading quietly. The next quarter came and went, and the numbers didn't recover. We cut more staff, reduced expenses, tightened everything until it squealed. I told myself it was temporary, that we'd bounce back stronger than ever. But behind the glass walls of my office, I could feel something I hadn't felt in years. Isolation. No one looked me in the eye anymore. Conversation stopped when I entered a room. Even my board, once so eager to praise me, now spoke in tones heavy with caution. They smelled fear. Not theirs, mine. At home, things weren't better. My wife, Catherine, had grown distant. "You're never here," she said one night as I poured myself another drink. "You talk about profits, not people. Do you even hear yourself anymore?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, because deep down I knew she was right. But pride is a disease, one that convinces you you're fine even as it kills you. I started working longer hours, staying late into the night, telling myself it was for the company. Truth was, I didn't want to go home. The silence there was louder than any boardroom. One night, around midnight, I walked through the building alone. The lights were dim, the hallways quiet. And that's when I noticed something. The floor. It was smudged, faint streaks where the mop hadn't passed in weeks. The corners gathered dust. The glass panels had lost their perfect shine. It was strange how something so small could unsettle me. That spotless floor had always been part of my world, an unspoken sign that everything was in order. But now, it was imperfect, human. It reminded me that I had removed something irreplaceable, though I didn't understand it yet. Days turned to weeks, and the company's image began to crack publicly. Bad press, unhappy employees, a scandal involving one of our executives. The media loved it. The untouchable Robert Hale was suddenly vulnerable. I fought harder, press conferences, damage control, strategic spin. But no matter how many lies I polished, the truth kept shining through the cracks. My arrogance had blinded me to the storm forming beneath me. And then one morning, I arrived at work to find protesters outside. Former employees, union workers, people demanding answers. Their signs read things like, "We gave you our years," and "You took everything." I stood by the window, watching from above, my reflection overlapping with theirs in the glass. For the first time, I didn't see a leader. I saw a man who had built his throne on other people's backs. I turned away, but the image followed me. In the weeks that followed, everything began to unravel faster than I could control. Deals collapsed, investors withdrew, and the board started holding secret meetings, ones I wasn't invited to. My empire was slipping, and no suit, no speech, no arrogance could hold it together anymore. I started noticing something strange in the mirror. The man who once radiated confidence now looked tired, hollow-eyed, almost frightened. The same suit still fit, but somehow it looked heavier. My reflection had become a stranger's, someone hiding behind fabric and fear, and for the first time in my life, I felt small. I tried to remind myself who I was, Robert Hale, the man who never loses. But when you've spent your life looking down at people, it's hard to recognize what it means to look up again. I thought I was untouchable, but life has a way of reaching even the highest floors. Losing a job doesn't hurt as much as losing the reason you wake up in the morning. When you've spent 23 years doing the same job, your days start to take on a rhythm, one that feels less like routine and more like heartbeat. For me, that heartbeat stopped the moment I heard the words, "You're done here." At first, I didn't even process it. I just stood there in the CEO's office, my uniform still damp from the mop bucket, my hands rough and cold against the handle I hadn't yet put down. My ears rang with the sound of his voice, clean, sharp, and dismissive, like the scrape of a shoe against something unwanted. I walked out of that building with my head down, the hallway stretching out longer than I'd ever remembered it. People stared. Some pitied me. Most didn't even notice. The security guard nodded awkwardly as I passed. The receptionist avoided eye contact. I pushed through the glass doors and stepped into the sunlight that didn't feel like sunlight anymore. It felt like exposure. For 23 years, I had scrubbed those floors until they gleamed. Floors that now reflected nothing but my absence. The bus ride home felt longer than usual. The city outside blurred past the window. The same city I had kept clean every night without ever being truly part of it. Every stop was a reminder that life moved on. People rushing to jobs, to meetings, to lunches, while mine had simply stopped. When I got home, my wife, Maria, was in the kitchen. The smell of rice and beans filled the air, a familiar comfort that made my throat tighten. She turned when she saw me, smiling in that warm, steady way she always did. "You're home early," she said. I tried to smile back, but it felt forced, unnatural. "Yeah," I said quietly. "They let me go." Her hands froze over the stove. The sound of the simmering pot filled the silence between us. "What?" she whispered, her voice caught between shock and fear. I couldn't look her in the eyes. "They said they were restructuring, cutting costs." She turned off the burner, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked toward me. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she wrapped her arms around me. "We'll be okay." She murmured against my chest. "We always are." But her voice trembled, and I knew she didn't believe it any more than I did. Our daughter, Lily, came running in a few minutes later, her backpack bouncing, her smile wide. "Daddy," she said, hugging my leg, "can we go to the park this weekend?" I opened my mouth to say yes, the same automatic yes I'd given her 100 times before. But the words caught in my throat. "We'll see," I managed, forcing another smile. She nodded, satisfied, and ran off to her room, humming. Maria and I sat at the table after dinner that night, the air thick with silence. We went over the bills, the mortgage, the grocery list. Every number felt heavier than the last. My severance pay would barely last a month. The savings we had, if you could call them that, would keep us afloat for maybe 2. "I'll find something," I said, more to convince myself than her. "Anything. I've done this long enough. Somebody will need me." She nodded slowly, though her eyes told a different story. The same quiet fear that had begun to settle in my chest like dust. The next morning I put on the same uniform, the only set of clothes I owned that made me feel like I had a purpose, and went out looking for work. I walked for hours, from office to office, shop to shop, asking if anyone needed help cleaning, fixing, lifting, anything. Most people said they weren't hiring. Some didn't bother to respond at all. A few gave me sympathetic looks before shaking their heads. By the 3rd day, my feet ached, my throat was dry, and my hope was running thin. I sat on a bench near the bus station, watching people in suits rush by, briefcases, heels clicking, laughter spilling from coffee shops. None of them noticed me. I could have vanished right there, and the world would have kept spinning. That's the thing about being invisible your whole life. You get used to being unseen. But it hits different when you realize that even your absence won't be noticed. The next few weeks were a blur of rejection and exhaustion. Every no chipped away at me. I started to dread coming home, not because of my family, but because of what I saw in their eyes. My wife tried to hide her worry, cooking smaller portions, stretching leftovers, pretending we were fine. My daughter stopped asking about the park. She'd just sit by me at night while I stared at the classifieds, her head resting on my arm, her silence saying more than words ever could. The bills began to pile up on the counter like accusations. The landlord's reminder letter came first, polite but firm. Then the electricity notice, then the medical insurance cancellation. I kept them stacked neatly, like order could make them less real. One evening, I went back to the building, not inside, just across the street. I stood there for an hour, watching the tall glass tower glow against the night sky. I could see the janitors through the windows, new ones, younger ones, moving through the hallways I used to clean. They didn't know the floor's imperfections like I did, the spots that needed extra scrubbing, the corners where dirt liked to hide. To them, it was just another job. To me, it had been a lifetime. And somewhere in that building, sitting in the warmth of his office, was the man who had erased me with a single sentence. For the first time since I'd been fired, I felt something other than sadness, a sharp, burning ache that had no name. Not hate, not yet, but something close. The next morning I woke before dawn. The house was quiet, my family still asleep. I sat in the dark kitchen, staring at my reflection in the window. I looked older than I remembered, lines deeper, eyes duller. My hands, once strong from years of work, trembled slightly as I picked up the coffee cup. And that's when it hit me. The weight of it all. The loss wasn't just about money, or the job, or even pride. It was about purpose. For 23 years, I'd had a reason to wake up. I'd mattered, even if no one saw it. My work had kept people safe, clean, comfortable. My hands had held up a world that would never thank me for it. And now, without that, who was I? I tried to hold it in. The frustration, the guilt, the fear. But it came out anyway. Not loud, not violent, just a quiet, broken sound. A sob that started deep and refused to stop. I sat there with my head in my hands, the tears falling freely, the kind of crying that doesn't make noise because it's too heavy for sound. For the first time in my life, I felt truly empty. When the sun rose, its light spilled across the kitchen table, catching the edge of an old picture frame, a photo of me in my uniform, standing beside my daughter when she was still little. She'd written on the back, in crooked handwriting, "My daddy makes everything clean." I stared at those words until they blurred through the tears. That simple sentence, so innocent, so pure, became something else entirely. A reminder. A promise. That morning, I wiped my face, stood up, and looked at myself in the mirror one last time. The man staring back was broken. Yes, but not finished. I didn't know how or when or what it would take, but I made myself a vow. One day, the man who fired me, the one who couldn't remember my name, would remember it for the rest of his life. That night, I promised myself, one day he'd remember my name. The higher you fly on pride, the harder you fall on truth. There's a strange silence that lives in the spaces between success and self-destruction. You don't hear it at first. Not over the applause, the flashing lights, the praise. But it's there, waiting. I didn't realize it then, of course. I was too busy enjoying the noise. My name was on magazine covers, printed in bold letters beside words like visionary, leader, icon. I had built a company from nothing and turned it into an empire. Every quarter, profits climbed higher. Every headline celebrated me as the man who could do no wrong. At least, that's what I believed. I had an office that touched the clouds, floor-to-ceiling glass. The city stretched beneath me like it belonged to me. I wore suits worth more than most people made in a month, and I measured my worth in numbers, not people. My schedule was filled with meetings, interviews, and dinners where everyone laughed a little too hard at my jokes. I told myself I deserved it, every bit of it. The truth? I was addicted, not to success, but to the feeling of being untouchable. Every morning, I'd walk into the building with an army of assistants trailing behind me, their tablets glowing with tasks and names that meant nothing to me. I didn't look at faces anymore. Faces were distractions. Faces slowed you down. Efficiency came from distance, from treating people as parts of a system, not as souls. If someone didn't meet expectations, they were gone. Simple as that. You can't let emotion cloud business, I used to say in interviews. Reporters called it decisive leadership. I called it survival. The day I fired that janitor, what was his name again? It barely registered. He was just another number in the expense sheet. Someone had reported that his section had missed cleaning a conference room before a client meeting. I didn't ask questions. I didn't care about the reasons. I called him in, delivered the decision like a judge passing sentence, and moved on to my next meeting. But I remember one thing: the look in his eyes. Not anger, not defiance, but something quieter, something that almost looked like pity. For me. It unsettled me for a moment, but I brushed it off. Men like him envied men like me. That's all it was. Within hours, I'd forgotten him. That was the kind of man I'd become, the kind who could erase people from his memory as easily as deleting a file. My days were a blur of excess. Lavish parties filled my nights, champagne flowing, lights flashing, music drowning out thought. Models, investors, influencers. They all gathered around me like moths to a flame. They called me the Golden Man, and I let them. I liked the way it sounded. I liked the way it felt to believe that I was the center of their world. I remember one particular night vividly. It was the company's 10th anniversary gala, a black tie event held in the ballroom of one of the city's most expensive hotels. The chandeliers sparkled like constellations, and my name was printed in gold across every banner. People clapped as I walked in. Glasses clinked, cameras flashed. My CFO leaned toward me at one point and said, "You've done it, sir. You've built something untouchable." I smiled, the champagne burning in my throat. Untouchable, I repeated. I liked that word. It fit me perfectly. I gave a speech that night. The kind that sounds inspiring but means nothing. I thanked my board, my team, my investors. I used words like innovation and vision and excellence. I didn't thank the people who cleaned the offices, fixed the lights, or stayed late without pay. They didn't exist in my version of success. When the crowd roared with applause, I lifted my glass high and said, "To the future, may it always belong to us." The cameras caught the moment, the perfect smile, the perfect toast. It made the front page the next day. But what no one saw, what no camera could catch, was the look in my eyes when I lowered that glass. Behind the charm, behind the grin, there was emptiness. Because when the music stopped, when the guests left, when the laughter faded into silence, I was always the last one standing in that vast room, surrounded by the echoes of my own success. I had everything: the cars, the house, the money, but there was something missing, something I didn't dare name. When you spend enough time pretending to be above everyone else, you forget what it feels like to be with anyone at all. I used to stand by my office window at night, looking down at the city, wondering what it felt like to live a normal life again, to care about something that wasn't a number. But I'd push the thought away, pour another drink, and remind myself that normal was for people who hadn't made it. One evening, during a meeting, one of my junior managers brought up concerns about layoffs. "Sir," he said cautiously, "people are scared. They're saying you're cutting too much too fast. Morale is—" I interrupted him before he could finish. "Morale doesn't pay bills," I said coldly. "If they don't like it, they can leave." He nodded, silent. But I saw the disappointment in his eyes, the kind of look you get from someone who once believed in you. I brushed it off, as always. I convinced myself that I was doing what great leaders do, making hard choices. I even joked about it at board meetings. "We don't fire people," I'd say with a smirk. "We set them free." The room would laugh. The sound of rich men pretending cruelty was clever. But every empire, no matter how high it stands, starts cracking from within. You just don't see it until it's too late. The first crack came in the form of numbers: small dips in quarterly reports, missed targets, declining investor confidence. My CFO tried to warn me. "We're spreading too thin," he said one afternoon. "The new acquisitions aren't stable." I waved him off. "It's a temporary dip. Numbers always bounce back." But they didn't. The second crack was personal. My wife left quietly one morning, leaving only a note on the marble counter. "I don't recognize you anymore." That was all it said. No fight, no drama, just truth, written in a few sharp words that cut deeper than any headline ever could. Still, I kept going. I buried myself in work, in meetings, in anything that kept me from feeling the silence of my own home. I started firing people faster. It was easier than admitting I was losing control. I told myself it was strategic restructuring, but really it was punishment for their fear, for my failure, for the cracks I refused to see. And somewhere in all that chaos, someone mentioned his name again. The janitor I had fired months ago. "He used to be one of the good ones," a department head said casually. "Always early, never complained." I laughed. "Good doesn't make money," I replied. The room laughed with me, but the echo of that laughter felt hollow. Because deep down, somewhere behind the arrogance, I felt something shift, a faint whisper of unease I couldn't quite silence. I brushed it off again, but that whisper grew louder every day until it became impossible to ignore. The cracks were spreading, and I didn't know it yet, but the same world that had raised me up was getting ready to watch me fall. But even kings fall when the walls start cracking. No one expects the empire they built to crumble overnight. For years, I believed I was untouchable. My company's logo was carved into the skyline, my name printed on glossy magazine covers beside words like innovator, genius, and visionary. I shook hands with governors, dined with billionaires, and lectured young entrepreneurs about the art of winning. I was the man people wanted to be. Sharp suit, sharper mind, and a heart that had long forgotten how to feel. But empires built on arrogance have a strange way of collapsing, not with a single explosion, but with small, silent cracks that no one notices until it's too late. It began on a Tuesday. Funny how something so ordinary can mark the beginning of ruin. My phone buzzed non-stop that morning. Texts, emails, missed calls. My assistant burst into my office, pale as paper. "Sir, we have a problem," she said, voice trembling. I didn't look up. "We always have problems, Jenna. That's why they pay me." But then she placed her tablet on my desk, and the headline glared back at me in bold, merciless letters. "Insider trading scandal. Hale Enterprises under investigation." For a moment, I thought it was a mistake, a rumor, a hit piece from a competitor. Then the second headline appeared, and the third. Every news outlet carried my name, my face, my downfall. Someone inside had leaked private documents, emails, bank statements, transactions that painted me as a man who'd profited off insider information. I hadn't done it. At least, not directly. But in my world, perception was truth, and the court of public opinion was faster than any judge. By noon, the phone calls weren't congratulations. They were withdrawals. Investors who had once begged for a seat at my table now demanded their money back. Partnerships dissolved overnight. Clients sent polite but sharp letters ending contracts. The first person to turn on me was someone I trusted. Daniel Reed, my co-founder and closest friend. We'd started the company together in a cramped apartment with nothing but ambition and a couple of laptops. We'd built everything side by side. But when the storm hit, he vanished. And when the press demanded answers, he gave them, not to defend me, but to save himself. He made the final calls, Daniel told reporters. I wasn't aware of all his actions. Betrayal doesn't come with warning signs. It comes with familiar voices and old handshakes. The media turned savage. Every interview, every success story, every speech I'd ever given was suddenly replayed with a new tone. Arrogance, greed, deceit. My name wasn't a symbol of success anymore. It was a synonym for corruption. The lawsuits followed. Shareholders demanded explanations. The government opened investigations. My legal team camped outside my office, trying to clean the mess while I sat behind my desk, staring at the empire I'd built, now on fire. Reporters stood outside the building, cameras flashing like lightning every time I stepped out. "Mr. Hale, did you know about the illegal trades? Were you part of the cover-up? Is it true your partner turned on you?" At first, I answered. Then I stopped. Because no matter what I said, it didn't matter. The narrative was already written. I wasn't Robert Hale, the visionary, anymore. I was Robert Hale, the fallen. Weeks passed. The office that used to buzz with ambition now echoed with emptiness. Desks sat vacant. Phones stopped ringing. The employees who had once smiled at me in the elevator now avoided my gaze. One by one they left, some quietly, some without even clearing their desks. It's strange, watching your own creation die in front of you. The building that once represented my triumph now felt like a tomb. I'd walk the halls at night, listening to the hum of the air vents, the sound of my shoes on the tile. Every echo reminded me of what I'd lost. Not the money, not even the reputation, but the people. The truth is, money never buys loyalty. It only rents silence. And when the rent runs out, everyone walks away. My wife didn't even wait for the storm to pass. One morning, I woke up to an empty side of the bed and a single note. "I can't live in a house built on lies." I read it 100 times, though it said the same thing each time, that she had seen the real me long before I did. I stopped going home after that. I stayed in the office, sleeping on the leather couch in my glass box of failure. The skyline that once made me feel powerful now mocked me. I used to look down at the city and see opportunity. Now, I saw distance. The company's stock collapsed within months. The board, once full of sycophants, voted unanimously to remove me as CEO. I didn't fight it. What was there to fight for? My empire was gone. My name was poison. The same people who once toasted to my brilliance now avoided even saying my name aloud. I remember the day the last investor pulled out. It was raining. Heavy, relentless. I stood by the window, watching the drops race down the glass, each one a small, silent reminder that everything falls eventually. My assistant came in quietly, a folder in her hand. "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "they've frozen your accounts." I nodded. I didn't even feel anger anymore, just exhaustion. That night, I sat alone in the boardroom, surrounded by empty chairs and the ghosts of conversations that once filled the space. I poured myself a drink, the last from the cabinet, and stared at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. The man staring back wasn't the man from magazine covers. His tie was loosened, his eyes hollow, his suit wrinkled. He looked like someone who had spent too long pretending to be more than he was. And then, somewhere between the silence and the sound of the rain, I thought of him. The janitor. The man I fired without a second thought. The man whose eyes had held pity, not anger. The man I'd dismissed as invisible. I saw his face as clearly as if he were standing in front of me. His hands, rough from work. His uniform, worn but clean. His quiet dignity. I'd erased him from my world, and yet here he was, uninvited, unforgettable. For the first time in years, I whispered his name. I didn't know why. Maybe because I realized, in that moment, that he had something I'd lost long ago: humility, purpose, honor. I had built towers, but he had built meaning. It hit me then, the cruel irony of it all. I'd spent my life looking down on men like him, and now I was the one on my knees. That night, as thunder rolled over the city, I poured the rest of the drink down the sink and stood by the window one last time. The streets below shimmered under the rain, washed clean, shining under the streetlights. And in that reflection, that trembling image of my own fall, I saw the truth I had refused to see for years. Everything I'd built was gone, but what I had destroyed still remained. And that was the night he finally remembered my face. Life has a way of bringing you back to the people you wronged. It had been almost 2 years since the collapse. The empire I once ruled was gone, swallowed by debt, lawsuits, and the kind of silence that follows when your name becomes a warning instead of a symbol. My house was sold. My cars were repossessed. My so-called friends vanished faster than the champagne bubbles they used to toast me with. I was living in a one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city now, the kind with paper-thin walls and leaky faucets. The man who once flew first class was now lucky to afford a second-hand suit that still fit. Every morning, I stared at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the reflection. The face was the same, but the eyes had learned what loss really looked like. I'd been applying for jobs quietly, desperately. No one wanted to hire a disgraced CEO. My name still carried weight, just the wrong kind. I tried consulting, freelance advising, even small business mentoring, but doors closed before I could even knock. Pride, I learned, doesn't fill a stomach. One afternoon, I sat in a dim cafe nursing a cup of burnt coffee, scrolling through job listings on an old laptop. Most of them paid barely enough to survive. Still, I clicked through them like a man searching for oxygen underwater. That's when I saw it. A local charity hosting a business rehabilitation event for laid-off workers and small business owners. Helping Hands Rebuild Communities, the flyer said. I almost laughed at the irony. But something about it pulled me in. Maybe it was the word helping. I hadn't heard that word used near my name in years. I decided to go. The event was held in a modest community hall on the south side of the city. Folding chairs, cheap coffee, a banner that read "Second Chances." The place smelled like dust and hope. I walked in, head down, trying not to attract attention. The room was full of people, former factory workers, single mothers, small business owners who'd lost everything. I found a seat near the back, my suit slightly out of place among the worn jackets and work boots. The host began introducing speakers, local entrepreneurs who had turned hardship into opportunity. I listened half-heartedly until I heard the next name. Please welcome Mr. Thomas Collins, founder of Collins Cleaning Services. The name hit me like a stone to the chest. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. But when I looked up, there he was. The janitor. He looked older, yes, but there was something different about him. Not the weariness I remembered, but peace. His back was straight, his movements calm, his eyes steady. He wore a simple shirt and clean slacks. No uniform this time. And yet he carried himself with more dignity than I ever had in my $1,000 suits. He walked to the podium, a quiet smile on his face. The crowd greeted him warmly, some clapping, others nodding like they already knew his story. "Good afternoon," he began. His voice was low, gentle, the same tone I remembered from the day I fired him. "My name is Thomas Collins. For 23 years, I worked as a janitor in a corporate building uptown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. I believed that hard work always led to respect, until one day, I learned that sometimes the world doesn't work that way." The audience listened closely. So did I, though my pulse pounded in my ears. "I lost my job without warning," he continued. "I thought it was the end. But it turns out losing everything can be the start of something better, if you don't lose yourself." He talked about starting small, cleaning local shops, hiring 1 or 2 people, then slowly expanding. He now employed over a dozen workers, most of them people who'd been laid off or overlooked like he once was. "We don't just clean floors," he said with a smile. "We clean slates. Everyone deserves one." The room erupted in applause. I clapped too, but my hands trembled. Watching him stand there, speaking with such calm conviction, something inside me twisted. Pride, shame, admiration, regret. When the event ended, people lined up to shake his hand. I stayed in my seat until most of the crowd had cleared, then stood up slowly. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking toward judgment itself. He was gathering his notes when I finally approached. "Mr. Collins," I said softly. He turned. For a second, neither of us spoke. His eyes met mine, and in them, I saw recognition, followed by something unexpected. Not anger, not triumph, but stillness. "Mr. Hale," he said quietly. My name. Spoken not with respect, not with hatred, but with something deeper, understanding. "I didn't know you'd be here," I said, my voice unsteady. I heard your speech. It was inspiring." He studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod. "It's been a long time." "Too long," I admitted. "You've done well for yourself." He smiled faintly. "I've been fortunate. Life has a way of teaching us what really matters." I swallowed hard. The words caught in my throat. "I owe you an apology," I said finally, "for what I did, for how I treated you. It was wrong. I was wrong." He looked at me then. Really looked. The silence between us stretched, filled with everything I'd left unsaid all those years ago. "I appreciate that," he said simply. "But you don't owe me anything, Mr. Hale. We all make choices. Some hurt others. Some teach us who we are." His calmness shook me more than any anger ever could. I had expected bitterness, maybe resentment, but all I found was grace, the kind that doesn't shout or demand, but humbles you by existing. "You remember that day?" I asked quietly. He nodded. "I do. But I don't carry it anymore. You see, the day you fired me, it broke something. But it also built something new. I learned that my worth was never tied to someone else's opinion." I felt the words pierce straight through me. How ironic that the man I'd once erased from my life was now teaching me what I'd spent my entire life failing to learn. We stood there in silence for a long moment. I wanted to say more, to explain, to apologize again, to make him understand that I wasn't the same man anymore. But before I could, someone from the crowd called his name. He turned toward them, then looked back at me. "It was good to see you again," he said. "Thomas," I said, stopping him before he walked away. He glanced over his shoulder. If you ever need anything—" He smiled, gentle but firm. "I already have what I need, Mr. Hale." And with that, he walked away. Calm, collected, and whole. I stood there watching him go, surrounded by strangers who didn't know the history between us. My throat tightened. I wanted to call after him, to say something that would erase what I'd done. But there was nothing left to say. When I finally left the building, the air outside felt heavier somehow. Not because of guilt, but because of realization. I had spent years thinking power meant being above others. But real strength, I'd just seen, comes from standing tall even after the world tries to break you. And when he spoke my name, it wasn't with power, it was with shame. It's one thing to be powerful. It's another to ask for help from the man you once destroyed. A week after that charity event, I found myself sitting in my apartment staring at a business card. It was simple, white and clean. Collins Cleaning Services written neatly across the center, with a small slogan underneath. "We clean more than floors, we clean second chances." He had handed it to me before he left, not as a gesture of pity, but as something else. I wasn't sure what. Maybe closure, maybe mercy. But I couldn't stop staring at it. The truth was, my life had fallen even further since that day. Whatever little savings I had left were gone. My consulting proposals went unanswered, my phone calls ignored. The world had moved on, and I was nothing more than a faded headline people whispered about. That's when the email arrived. A former investor had reached out about a failing property, an office complex that had become a public embarrassment after being shut down mid-renovation. The new owners were offering me a consulting job. "If you can get it running again," the message read, "you'll be paid well. Consider it a start." I accepted instantly. But when I visited the property, I understood why no one else wanted it. The building was in ruins, debris everywhere, dust thick in the air, the faint smell of mold rising from the carpets. The place needed everything: cleaning, repair, structure, soul. And that's when I thought of him. Thomas Collins, the man I'd once fired with a sentence, the man who now ran a thriving cleaning company. The irony wasn't lost on me. I told myself it was just business, that I was simply hiring the best service I could find. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about cleaning a building. It was about something I'd been avoiding for years: redemption. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the card. The voice that answered was calm, steady, unmistakable. Collins Cleaning Services, this is Thomas. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I cleared my throat, forcing the words out. Thomas, this is Robert Hale. There was silence on the other end. Not long, but long enough for me to feel it. Yes, he said finally. I remember. I swallowed hard. I have a project, a building that needs complete restoration. It's a big job, and I thought of you. He didn't answer right away. You thought of me, he repeated softly, as if testing the words. That's unexpected. I know, I admitted. But you're the best at what you do. I'd rather work with someone who knows how to rebuild than someone who only knows how to destroy. Another silence, then a quiet sigh. Email me the details, he said. I'll take a look. When he hung up, I exhaled the breath I didn't know I'd been holding. 2 days later, he arrived at the site. I saw him pull up in a modest white van, his company's logo printed neatly on the side. He stepped out, clipboard in hand, wearing simple work clothes, neat, pressed, unpretentious. His hair was grayer than I remembered, but his presence, it was steady, solid. Mr. Hale, he greeted me politely as we met by the entrance. Please, I said quickly. Just Robert. He nodded once. Then you can call me Thomas. We walked through the building together, the silence between us heavy but not hostile. He inspected the walls, the carpets, the air ducts, all with a quiet precision that spoke of experience. I followed him, pretending not to notice the irony of it all. That the man who used to clean my office now walked ahead of me, clipboard in hand, assessing the ruins of what I'd once represented. After an hour, he turned to me. It's a big job, he said simply. You'll need more than cleaning. Restoration, repainting, maybe even rewiring. It's not cheap. I understand, I said. Whatever it takes. He studied me carefully. Why this building? I hesitated. Because it's mine, I said finally. At least it used to be. I built it. And now, I want to see it whole again. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. All right, he said. We'll take the job. For weeks, I came to the site every day. His crew worked tirelessly, cleaning, scrubbing, restoring life to something long forgotten. I watched from the sidelines, humbled by the simplicity of their effort. There were no suits, no fancy titles, no meaningless meetings, just honest work. Thomas didn't treat me like a client. He treated me like a man, and that was harder to face than any insult could have been. One afternoon, I found him working alone, scrubbing the corner of a hallway with a rag in his hand. The CEO in me wanted to tell him to delegate, but I stopped myself. You still do the work yourself, I said quietly. He looked up, smiling faintly. Old habits, he replied. Sometimes the only way to make sure it's done right is to do it yourself. I nodded, unsure how to respond. Then I said, I owe you more than money, Thomas. You didn't have to take this job. He leaned back on his heels, wiping his hands on a towel. You're right. I didn't. There was no anger in his tone, just truth. I took a deep breath. When I called you that day years ago, when I fired you, I thought I was doing what leaders do. I thought removing people made me stronger. I didn't realize I was just cutting pieces out of myself. He looked at me, his eyes calm but piercing. You were lost, Robert. We all are, sometimes. The difference is, some of us choose to find our way back. His words struck deep, not as accusation, but as understanding. I sat down on the steps beside him, the smell of disinfectant filling the air. You ever hate me for it? I asked quietly. He was silent for a moment. I did, he admitted. For a while, but hate's heavy. I had a family to feed, work to do. You can't carry both hate and hope. One of them always drops. I looked down, my throat tight. You're a better man than I ever was. He smiled gently. Maybe just a man who had more time to think about what matters. The simplicity of that sentence broke something inside me. Years of pride, arrogance, and false control washed away in that single moment of truth. Later that evening, as the workday ended, we stood by the entrance together. The building was coming back to life, piece by piece, wall by wall. It wasn't finished yet, but it was cleaner than it had been in years. I turned to him. You've built something real, Thomas. Something I never did. He looked out at the setting sun. Maybe. But it all starts the same way, with cleaning up what's broken. We stood in silence for a long moment before I said, I want to invest in your company. You deserve more recognition. He shook his head immediately. I don't want your money, Robert. I built this without it. I don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. I nodded, realizing he meant it. His dignity wasn't for sale. When he left that night, I stayed behind, walking through the quiet halls lit by the orange glow of dusk. The place smelled of bleach and dust, clean, new, hopeful. But as I stood there alone, I felt the old hunger again, not for success, not for wealth, but for redemption. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I deserved it. I didn't know if I should help him, or let him learn what real hunger feels like. Some lessons in life can't be bought. They have to be lived. It was late in the evening when the confrontation finally came. The building was nearly restored, the floors gleaming, the windows spotless, the air fresh and new. Thomas's crew had finished for the day, leaving only the two of us standing in the lobby. The same kind of space where, years ago, I'd once watched him mop floors while I barked orders from behind a polished desk. Now, the roles were reversed. He stood tall, calm, his work clothes still smudged with dust and effort. I stood across from him, wearing the only suit I still owned, creased, tired, and far less powerful than it used to make me feel. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was heavy with years of what had gone unsaid. Finally, he broke it. Why did you fire me that day? He asked, his tone even, almost gentle. I froze. I'd imagined this moment 100 times. The apology, the explanations, the reasons I'd rehearsed in my head. But standing in front of him, every excuse I'd ever prepared felt meaningless. I thought, I began, struggling to find words that didn't sound hollow. I thought I was doing what leaders are supposed to do. Cutting costs, making examples, showing strength. Thomas nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering. And what did that get you? The question wasn't cruel. It was surgical, direct, clean. I looked around the empty building, at the dust that still clung to the corners, at the faint echo of footsteps from a team that wasn't mine anymore. It got me here, I said softly. Alone. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he took off his gloves and set them neatly on a bucket beside him. When you fired me, he said, his voice calm, I went home and told my wife I'd lost my job. My daughter was in the next room drawing a picture for school. She was so proud that her father worked in the big glass building downtown. She thought I was someone important. He paused, looking past me. Not with anger, but with the weight of memory. That night, I sat at the kitchen table for hours, trying to figure out how to tell her that the man she looked up to didn't matter to anyone, that he could be erased with a single sentence. I swallowed hard, guilt pressing against my ribs. I'm sorry, I said quietly. For all of it. He looked at me then. Really looked. And for a moment, I saw the man I'd fired all those years ago, standing in my office, clutching his cap, trying to understand why his years of service meant nothing. You're not the first man to forget what other people are worth, he said. You saw the building, the profits, the headlines, but not the hands that kept it standing. Men like me, we don't show up in board meetings or press photos. We just clean up after them. His words hit harder than any insult could have. I wanted to defend myself, to say that I hadn't meant harm, but the truth was, I had. Not out of malice, but out of blindness. I was arrogant, I admitted. I thought success made me untouchable. I thought losing people was just part of progress. Thomas's expression softened slightly. And now? Now I know progress isn't built on people you step over, I said. It's built with them. He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening in the low light. That's a lesson most men learn too late. We stood in silence again. The hum of the fluorescent lights above us filled the air, and for a moment the years between us collapsed into this one fragile second of honesty. Then he said quietly, "You know, when I lost my job, I didn't just lose money. I lost purpose. I'd spent my whole life cleaning up after people, making sure their mistakes didn't show. I thought that's all I was good for. But after that day, I realized something." "What?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He met my eyes. "You can't clean up other people's messes forever. Eventually, you have to build something of your own." I felt my throat tighten. He wasn't just talking about himself. He was talking about me, about the empire I'd built on the backs of others, and the ruins I was standing in now. "You did build something," I said quietly, "and you built it right." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes from peace, not pride. "Maybe, but I didn't do it alone. My wife stood by me. My daughter believed in me even when I didn't. Every mop I pushed, every floor I scrubbed, it wasn't about cleaning dirt. It was about earning back the dignity that someone once took from me." The words stung, but not because they were cruel, because they were true. I took a step closer, my voice shaking. "Thomas, I need to ask you something." He raised an eyebrow. "What's that? How do you forgive someone like me?" He exhaled slowly, glancing at the bucket beside him, as if the answer might be hiding somewhere in its reflection. "You don't start with forgiveness," he said finally. "You start with understanding. Forgiveness comes after." He turned to face me fully now, his voice firm but kind. "You wanted to be powerful, Robert. But real power isn't in making people fear you. It's in being someone they remember for the right reasons." The words settled between us like dust on the polished floor, soft, final, undeniable. I felt something inside me give way then. The weight of years of arrogance, guilt, and failure broke open, and for the first time in my life, I didn't try to hide it. My knees weakened, my head bowed, and my voice trembled. "I was wrong, Thomas. I was wrong about everything." He didn't move toward me, didn't reach out. He simply stood there, letting me unravel in front of him. When I finally looked up, his expression wasn't pity. It was respect, quiet, steady, and real. "You're learning," he said softly. "That's what matters." Something in me wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. "You sound like a teacher," I said weakly. He smiled faintly. "Life made me one." For a long moment we just stood there, two men who had both lost everything once, standing in the ruins of pride and the beginning of peace. And then, as he picked up his gloves to leave, he paused at the doorway, turned back, and said something I'll never forget. "Good night, sir." It was simple, just 2 words, but in that moment they carried the weight of years, of pain, redemption, and the kind of respect that can't be bought, only earned. And for the first time he called me sir. Sometimes the dirtiest thing in a company isn't the floor, it's the heart of the man running it. It had been weeks since our confrontation, weeks that felt like both a lifetime and a single breath. The air between us had changed. The silence that once carried resentment now held something different, an unspoken understanding that neither of us quite knew how to name. I had seen Thomas several times since that night. Each time, I found myself watching him more closely. The steady rhythm of his work, the calm precision of his movements, the quiet dignity in the way he carried himself. He didn't move like a man defined by labor anymore. He moved like someone who had mastered peace. And maybe that was why I did what I did next. It was early morning when I called him into the office. The same office that had once been my throne, and later my prison. The walls were bare now, stripped of the framed articles that once praised me, the awards that once reminded me I mattered. The company itself was a shadow of what it had been. The investors were gone, the staff scattered, the lights dimmed to save what little money remained. But I had something left that I hadn't before: humility, and I intended to use it. When he stepped into the room, I stood to greet him. That simple gesture, one I'd never offered him before, seemed to say more than any words could. He paused for a moment, studying me, then gave a small nod. "You wanted to see me?" "Yes," I said, gesturing for him to sit. "Please." He hesitated, then took the chair opposite mine. I leaned forward, my hands clasped together on the desk that suddenly felt far too big for the kind of conversation I needed to have. "Thomas," I began, my voice careful, deliberate. "You once told me that I forgot what other people were worth. You were right. I built this company thinking numbers and power were everything. But I was wrong. I see that now, and I want to rebuild it differently." He listened quietly, his eyes steady. I could tell he was waiting for the catch, the part where I offered him another empty apology or a token of guilt disguised as opportunity. But that wasn't what I was here to do. "I need your help," I said simply. His brow furrowed slightly. "My help?" "Yes," I replied. "Not as a janitor, not as an employee, as something more. I want you to help me rebuild this place, not its finances, not its image, but its people, the heart of it. Because somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what makes a company worth anything at all." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms slowly. There was no triumph in his expression, no satisfaction in watching me bend, just quiet thoughtfulness. "And what exactly do you expect me to do?" I took a breath. "Be honest with me. Tell me what I did wrong. Help me fix the things I broke. Teach me how to see people again." The silence that followed was long. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic outside. Finally, Thomas spoke. "That's not something you fix overnight," he said. "You can't just rebuild trust because you decide to. You have to earn it, slowly, one act at a time." "I know," I said. "That's why I need someone who understands what that takes." He studied me for a moment longer, his eyes narrowing slightly as if weighing not my words, but my sincerity. Then, almost reluctantly, he nodded. "All right," he said finally. "I'll help. But I'm not coming back as an employee. I'm not here to clean your floors again." I smiled faintly. "No. You're here to clean something much dirtier." His lips twitched in the ghost of a smile, but he didn't reply. He just nodded once and stood, extending his hand. When I took it, it wasn't the handshake of a superior to a subordinate. It was two men, equals, shaking hands for the first time. Over the following weeks, Thomas became something of a quiet force in the company. He didn't have a title or a corner office, but somehow his presence changed everything. People listened to him, not because of his authority, but because of his authenticity. He treated the janitors the same way he spoke to the executives, with the same calm respect. And in return, people began to trust him. He would walk through the building, stopping to talk to employees, asking questions no one had ever asked before. "How's your mother doing? Did you get your promotion yet? Do you like it here?" Small questions, but they carried the kind of weight that makes people feel seen. I watched as conversations grew longer. Laughter returned to hallways that had gone silent. And even the tired workers who once rushed to clock out started staying late just to finish something together. It was strange to see my old world come alive again, not through numbers or profits, but through people. For the first time, I understood that leadership wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about listening. And Thomas had mastered that art better than anyone I'd ever met. One afternoon, I found him standing in the main lobby, watching one of the new janitors polish the marble floors. The sunlight from the tall windows reflected off the surface, casting long, warm patterns across the room. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said quietly, without turning around. "It is," I said, stepping beside him. "You always made them shine like that?" He smiled faintly. "It's not about the shine," he said. "It's about what it reflects." I looked at him, confused. He gestured toward the floor. "You can clean a surface all day, but if the foundation underneath is cracked, the shine won't last. The same goes for people. The same goes for companies." I nodded slowly, understanding more than I could admit aloud. That evening, I gathered the remaining employees in the conference room, the first meeting I'd led in months. The room was quiet, filled with cautious faces, people unsure if they could believe in me again. Thomas stood near the back, arms folded, watching. I cleared my throat. "I don't deserve your trust," I said. "Not yet. But I want to earn it. This company wasn't built by one man. It was built by all of you. And it fell because I forgot that. From today forward, things will be different. We'll rebuild this place together. One floor, one task, one person at a time." No one spoke for a moment. Then, slowly, a few heads nodded. The tension in the room began to ease, replaced by something faint but real. Hope. When the meeting ended, Thomas approached me. "You did good," he said. "I learned from the best," I replied. He smiled, his eyes glinting with quiet amusement. "Don't flatter me, Robert. I'm just a man with a mop." I shook my head. "No. You're the man who taught me what clean really means." For the first time in years, I walked through the building and felt proud again, not of the company, but of the people inside it. The laughter, the teamwork, the life returning to its walls, that was the real success. As the sun set, I stood at the top of the staircase overlooking the lobby, watching Thomas wipe down the handrails, his movements slow and deliberate. I realized then that the floors of this building had never been cleaner, not because of the polish, but because of the man who had taught me how to see what truly needed cleaning. But as I turned to leave, a strange thought crept into my mind, one that chilled me despite the warmth of that moment. Because if life had taught me anything, it was that peace never lasted long. And somewhere deep down, I could feel it. Fate wasn't done teaching either of us yet. Some apologies come too late, but they still matter. It had been years since the day I first shook his hand as an equal. Time, as it always does, had moved quietly, reshaping everything we thought would last forever. The company had changed beyond recognition, brighter, kinder, more human. Its walls no longer echoed with fear or ambition, but with laughter and purpose. And somewhere deep within that transformation was the hand of a man who never sought credit, who never needed applause to validate his worth. That man was Thomas. And as for me, Robert Langston, the once celebrated CEO who thought he ruled the world, my time had run its course. Age had softened me. My reflection, once so sharp and composed, now showed lines carved by regret and humility. I no longer chased headlines or profits. I spent my mornings in quiet reflection, my afternoons writing letters I never sent. The company no longer belonged to me, and for the first time, I was fine with that. It was in better hands now. But there was one letter I couldn't leave unwritten. The doctors had told me I didn't have much time left, a matter of weeks, perhaps. My body had grown frail, but my mind still carried the weight of old memories. Some good, most not. And one face, above all others, lingered in those memories, calm, kind, and unshakably dignified. The face of the man I had once humiliated, and who had later shown me what true strength looked like. So one night, with trembling hands and fading light spilling across my desk, I began to write. "Thomas, I don't know if this letter will reach you in time, or if you'll even care to read it. But before I leave this world, I need you to know the truth about me, about that day, and about everything that came after. When I fired you, I thought I was showing strength. In reality, I was revealing weakness. I had mistaken authority for wisdom, and success for worth. I had built an empire made of glass, polished but fragile. And you were the only man who ever showed me the cracks. That day, I saw myself as powerful because I could decide another man's fate. But years later, when I stood in front of you, broken and desperate, I realized the truth. Power isn't in control. It's in compassion. You taught me that. You didn't just help me rebuild a company. You helped me rebuild myself. You showed me what dignity looks like in the face of humiliation. You showed me how a man can lose everything and still carry himself like a king. I've spent years trying to live up to the example you set, quietly, humbly, honestly. And though I can never undo what I did, I hope I've at least honored your lesson by becoming a better man than I was. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know, when I leave this world, I will do so with gratitude. Gratitude for you, and for the day you decided not to hate me. Thank you for saving not my company, but my soul. With respect, Robert Langston. When the last word was written, I sat back in my chair and stared at the letter for a long time. My vision blurred as tears pooled at the corners of my eyes. It wasn't just an apology. It was a confession, a surrender, and a final attempt to wash away the stains of my past. I folded it carefully, sealed it in an envelope, and asked my nurse to deliver it to the man whose name I had once spoken with arrogance, and now uttered only with reverence. Days passed. The world outside my window carried on. The same streets, the same noise, the same restless rhythm of life. But I felt none of it. I was a man waiting for his last sunset. And for once, I wasn't afraid. And somewhere across town, in a modest home filled with warmth and quiet pride, Thomas received my letter. It was late afternoon when he found it in his mailbox. A simple envelope, his name written in familiar handwriting that he hadn't seen in years. He turned it over a few times, hesitating before opening it. When he finally tore the seal, his eyes caught the first line. "I don't know if this letter will reach you in time." And something in his chest tightened. He sat at the small wooden table in his kitchen, the same one where he had once cried after losing his job, the same table where he had later shared laughter with his daughter over home-cooked meals. Now he sat there again, holding the weight of my final words in his hands. He read slowly, his lips moving silently over each sentence, his expression shifting from surprise to sorrow to a kind of quiet peace. When he reached the end, "Thank you for saving not my company but my soul," he set the letter down and closed his eyes. For a long moment, he didn't move. The room was still except for the ticking of a small clock on the wall. Then, gently, he placed a hand over the letter and whispered, "You're forgiven, Robert." The words weren't loud, but they carried the weight of everything unspoken between us. The years of silence, the hurt, the understanding, and the redemption that had taken root in both of us long ago. He folded the letter again, slid it back into its envelope, and tucked it carefully inside an old photo album where he kept the pictures of his family and the few mementos from his years at the company. It wasn't just paper now. It was closure. Later that evening, he walked to the same building where our paths had first crossed, now bustling under new leadership, alive with the sound of people who cared about their work and about each other. The marble floors gleamed under the soft light, and for a brief moment he caught his reflection in them. He smiled faintly. "Still clean," he murmured to himself. He stood there for a while, watching life unfold, new employees rushing to meetings, laughter spilling from open doors. No one knew who he was anymore, but that didn't matter. His purpose had never been fame. It had been impact. The next morning, news spread quietly through the city. Robert Langston, former CEO, passed away peacefully in his sleep. When Thomas read the headline, he didn't feel sadness. He felt release. The letter had been Robert's final act of cleansing. One last sweep of the heart, one final act of honesty. That evening, Thomas returned to his old job one last time. He walked through the lobby, mop in hand, not because he had to, but because he wanted to, a quiet tribute to the man he once was, and to the one who had finally learned what clean truly meant. As he worked, the building lights reflected off the floor in perfect, unbroken lines. He paused for a moment, leaning on the handle, and whispered softly, "You did good, Robert." And in that silence, something inside him felt lighter, as if years of weight had finally lifted. In that moment he realized forgiveness had finally cleaned us both. The dirtiest floors I ever cleaned were inside people's hearts. It's strange how time has a way of polishing the roughest parts of your life, the same way a mop smooths out the dirt until what's left is reflection. I've spent most of my years cleaning floors, hospital corridors, office lobbies, marble hallways that smelled like wealth and pride. People used to walk past me without seeing me, stepping over the shine I left behind as if it appeared on its own. But what I've learned, what life forced me to learn, is that the mess that matters most isn't under our feet. It's inside us. When I was younger, I thought dignity came from holding on to pride. Now I know it comes from letting it go. Years have passed since the day I last saw Robert Langston, the man who once fired me, broke me, and, in the end, taught me something I couldn't have learned anywhere else. I still remember the letter he sent before he passed. Words written by a man who had finally learned how to look inward. I keep it in a drawer, beside my bed, folded and worn from being read too many times. Sometimes, when the world feels heavy, I take it out and read it again, just to remind myself that even the proudest hearts can learn how to bend. People ask me why I stayed in this line of work all these years. They think cleaning floors is something you do because you have no other choice. But the truth is, it's never just about cleaning. It's about renewal, restoration. Every stain tells a story of carelessness, of time, of life happening. And every time I make it disappear, it's like forgiving the world in small, quiet ways. The building where I work now isn't the same one where I met Robert, but it feels familiar. The sound of footsteps, the hum of fluorescent lights, the smell of polish and fresh air after rain. All of it reminds me of who I was and who I became. Sometimes I see young executives walking through the halls, heads high, voices sharp, full of certainty. I recognize that look, that blind confidence that comes before life humbles you. And when they nod at me now, I nod back, not with resentment, but with peace. Because I've learned that respect doesn't come from how people see you, it comes from how you see them. There was a time I wanted revenge. I won't lie about that. When Robert fired me, I dreamed of the day he'd regret it, the day he'd fall, and I'd watch from above. But life doesn't work like that. It doesn't give you revenge. It gives you perspective. And perspective is quieter, harder, and much more powerful. When I saw him again years later, older, humbled, stripped of everything that once made him invincible, I realized something I never expected. I didn't hate him anymore. I pitied him, not because he had lost his empire, but because he'd spent so long believing that's what made him valuable. He reminded me of every man who confuses noise for purpose, every leader who forgets that leadership begins with listening. And yet, even he found his way back, crawling through the wreckage of his mistakes to find something real on the other side. That's what forgiveness is, really. Not excusing what someone did, but choosing to see who they became after. Robert died years ago, but in a way, he's still here. Every time someone calls me sir, every time a young worker tells me they look up to me, I think of him. He left behind more than a company. He left behind a lesson that outlived both of us. And me? I kept doing what I've always done. Cleaning, restoring, healing the small, visible messes while trying to understand the invisible ones. Somewhere along the way, I started training others, young men and women who needed work, guidance, or just someone to believe they were worth more than their job title. When I hand them a mop for the first time, I always say the same thing. This isn't a tool for cleaning floors. It's a reminder that nothing no mistake, no life, no heart, is too dirty to be cleaned. They usually laugh, but later when they're older, they understand. The truth is, I don't think I ever stopped learning. Every building, every person, every floor has something to teach you if you're humble enough to listen. Power fades, money fades, even success, the kind the world celebrates, fades. But kindness endures. Kindness doesn't make headlines. It doesn't get you promoted or written about in magazines. But it leaves something behind, a ripple that outlives you. I think about Robert often, especially when I see executives walking through these halls. Sometimes I wonder if they'll ever learn what he did, if they'll ever look down and realize that the reflection on the floor isn't just polish, it's the lives of people who cared enough to make it shine. Maybe one day they will. And maybe when they do, they'll remember that the real strength of a company, of any man, really, isn't measured by how high you climb, but by how well you treat the ones who hold the ladder. Tonight, the building is quiet again. Everyone's gone home. The lights hum softly, casting golden reflections on the freshly cleaned floor. I move the mop back and forth. The rhythm so familiar it feels like breathing. My body's older now, slower, but my hands still know what to do. Each stroke leaves behind a shine that catches the light just right. A simple, beautiful kind of peace. I stop for a moment, leaning on the handle, and look at the reflection of myself in the marble. The man staring back isn't angry anymore. He isn't invisible. He's just grateful. Because somewhere between losing everything and forgiving it all, I found something that no amount of money could ever buy. Peace. I smile faintly, lift the mop again, and whisper the lesson life took decades to teach me. Never look down on the hands that make your world shine. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll away. Share it. Someone out there might need to hear it today. Hit subscribe for more powerful real-life stories that remind us what truly matters. And tell me in the comments, have you ever met someone who taught you the meaning of humility? Your story might just inspire the next one.